Hello everyone, and welcome to this new presentation by the Policy Center for the New South, this new roundtable, for which I am very happy to welcome in the alphabetical order, first of all, Dominique Bocquet, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, who notably recently published with us a policy report about Biden's presidency, and more specifically about the political economy of Biden's policy making. How it all started, the technocracy that built the program and then implemented it after the 2020 election, and Ottaviano Canuto, who is also a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, who was involved in the writing process of Dominique's paper, and who's based in Washington and therefore has primary access to the debates unfolding in the United States. Today's topic is going to be about the transatlantic relation and its implications for the New South. Transatlantic relations that in this case will specifically concern the relation between the United States and the European Union. We know that one of the priorities of Joe Biden was to try to strengthen the relation with Europe, or at least to take it from where it had ended after years of strain and tensions during the Trump presidency, notably illustrated within NATO, but also because of a certain lack of attention given to multilateralism, for instance. And so we saw the Biden administration creating institutions or mechanisms such as the Transatlantic Trade and Technology Council, although it has not operated very well. But we also saw the Biden administration very much pursuing and doubling down on some of the policies that we had seen during the Trump administration, notably vis-à-vis China, with the Chinese challenge. And this is something that we had the opportunity to evoke in a previous podcast, but with China being a matter of consensus, of bipartisan consensus in the United States and in Congress in particular. In spite of all the polarization and divisions that we have seen within the American political scene these past few years. But Biden's presidency was also the one that inaugurated what many have called a change of paradigm, with a lot of laws and major investment that were announced in industrial policy. So the Inflation Reduction Act was very much mentioned, the CHIPS Act, the law on investment in infrastructure as well. And therefore, these also provoked, or let's say triggered, some tensions with European partners that feared that the United States was not playing by the rules that it had advocated in the first place and that had helped globalization flourish. And recently we saw Europe itself trying to adopt a stronger position on a lot of issues, including artificial intelligence, including investment in innovation. In 2019, after Commissioner von der Leyen became the president of the European Commission, we saw the Green Deal as well that maybe announced this era of industrial policy. And of course, the last episode that we might mention is the Draghi report on Europe's competitiveness, on productivity gains in Europe, on investment in future technologies, and notably in order to ensure a successful transition to the fourth industrial revolution, or to a greener industrial Europe. So these are a lot of topics. I just would like to mention that these policy shifts have been happening pretty much at the same time in the United States and the European Union. Biden became president in January 2021. Von der Leyen became head of the Commission in 2019, so pretty much the same time. Now, we recently had European elections that made Commissioner von der Leyen re-elected at the head of the European Commission, and we also have elections in the United States, and the debates are pretty much the same. The challenges that are the same, and therefore this should ask for coordination. But one might wonder whether this is actually succeeding or not what the quality of the dialogue between the European Union and the United States is, and so on and so forth. The last remark I would like to make is that the Draghi report had as one of its starting points the observation that there was an increasing gap between the growth trajectory of the United States on the one hand and the growth trajectory of the European Union on the other one. So that was in part, the report came with recommendations notably to address this gap. So a lot of ideas that I have thrown out there, and I will start by turning to you, Dominique. How would you assess the quality of the dialogue between the United States and the European Union today, notably taking into account the fact that at the end of the day, the challenges appear to be the same? I know that you are very much interested in the question of purchasing power, in the question of the middle class, in the question of innovation as well. So how do you see the quality of the dialogue and in this framework and in the diverging dynamics between the two poles?
Well, I think the first point we have to make altogether is that the US is very much divided upon foreign policy and on trade policy, on security issues. So there used to be a large consensus in Washington on the issue. It's not the case at all. And you have one vision, which is America first, and one vision, which is strengthen alliances for the Dems. And for America first, the Trump vision, being a leader is a cost. For the Democrats, it's an asset. For Trump, trade is a cost. For the Democrats, trade is a risk. And the Democratic vision is a structural foreign policy based on American assets and alliances and global challenges, whereas for Trump it's a transactional foreign policy. So there is a divide which is even greater as the European divide. The Europeans don't yet have a common foreign policy. They are trying to, they are making progress. They will have a very strong high representative with Kaja Kallas, who is from Estonia. She's already extremely impressive. Before the election of the Commission, she has to go to the Parliament, the European Parliament. She's very impressive and very hard line as to Ukraine. But of course, the answer to your question depends completely on who will be elected. If, as to now, the relations are strong. The Americans have been very predictable, very transparent vis-à-vis the Europeans. As to Ukraine, I would not say the same as Middle East, which is a very special case. Of course, even for trade or for competition issues, there are worries with the Democrats because there was the Inflation Reduction Act you mentioned. But if the Democrats are to use protectionist weapons, they will try to use a smart protectionism. They will not to use just absurd across-the-board protections which Trump is proposing. So there will be a very big difference, I think, but maybe Ottaviano would have a different view on that.
Yes, indeed, maybe I will start by asking you about that, and therefore notably the quality of the dialogue between the United States and Europe. Would you say that, as Dominique mentioned, there was this predictability, transparency?
No, I'm very much in sync with what Dominique said. It's a good thread to think of the future relationships between the US and Europe, as well as the US and the New South, by looking at the two candidates have so far announced that they would and do, and we have enough to think it over. And even more starkly different than maybe you sounded in your introduction. They are not on the same page. Picking back on what Dominic said, one might, for instance, call Trump's direction of policy as a search for decoupling, which is a more severe cut of relations with China and eventually with the rest of the world, because that's what, let's say, Trump sounds like the old isolationism of the US. Whereas the approach taken by the Democrats, it's more of a de-risking. In this case, more similar to what Europe has proposed to do. Namely, for the sake of national security, apparently, or at least as a major motivation, you go and tackle specific segments, establishing, as Biden did, 100% on electric vehicles, but it's located in some segments. Whereas Trump has announced a range of 10 to 20%, he has increased this range, on everybody, and 60% on the Chinese. Now, one thing that we know is that, those types of mercantilist policies, they always underestimate the impact on everybody, including the perpetrator. And that happened with Trump in his first mandate, and maybe the last, when his tariffs on the Chinese products backlashed on the US manufacturing industry because of the increased costs on intermediate inputs and the retaliations and so on. The major, the manufacturing industry of the US suffered, and that is not me saying this. Studies shown, made by Federal Reserve Bank economists show that clearly. Not to speak of agriculture, because in the case of agriculture, the Brazilians took over a share of the US exports to China, and this thing has not been reversed. So ultimately...
And there was a cost for the American taxpayer because they had to compensate for agriculture and even, I think, for industry. So the federal state had to subsidize the sectors that were damaged by the retaliation, weren't they?
That's right, that's right. And there is something as well. Look, nobody thinks that this will be simply circumscribed to US-China. No one has any doubt that the so-called connector countries that started receiving investment from China right after the first trade war with Trump, as a way by the Chinese to circumvent the restrictions. Namely, I'm referring here to Mexico, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, and it's not by chance that since that time, since 2006, while the bilateral trade China-US diminished, suddenly the increase of exports from Mexico, they were associated from China. I have no doubt that the Trump's approach, and may likely there be something like this even with Kamala Harris, will try to impede those connector countries. So no new South country may think that it will escape safely from a drive such as Trump's. But there is more, if I may. This connects with the tax issue. Because Trump has stated, since he wants to make permanent the tax concessions to individuals in real estate that are due to renewal or not next year, in the case of the corporate income tax reduction, what Trump did first is permanent, so that's not to be reversed. But what's at stake now is the temporary income tax exemption open for individuals and for real estate. that Trump wants to make them permanent. And Trump says that he would compensate for the non-accrued, non-collected taxes with the tariffs on imports, which the rest of the world would pay, which is literally, there's no other way to say, a lie.
Because it's the American consumer.
It's the American consumer.
There's only one case where there would be a cost, and Samuelson has explained that. If the diminished American demand creates a decrease of prices for exporters, and so changes the terms of exchange. That's the case.
Yeah, but the estimates by any analyst that I know, the guys from the Peterson, show clearly a mismatch between, on the one hand, the increase of tax revenues coming from the import tariffs, and what will be foregone with the tax exemption made permanent. Mm-hmm. So Trump's proposal will increase the deficit, the public deficit, and this is something that cannot be hidden. And more, what's impressive, Peterson Institute economists have estimated that impact on the cost of living will be something close to $2,600 per annum on the average U.S. household spending costs. So the low-income family, the low-income family will be, particularly because in their case the ratio consumption to earnings is very high, will be hard hit by the tariffs. $2,600 per annum is not a simple, small amount.
Would that be a way to explain why Kamala Harris decided to very much focus her economic policy on the purchasing power of the middle class? Do you think it's a response to this possible degradation?
I think it's a deeper issue. I think there are concerns for the middle class. There have been concerns for the middle class for maybe 20 years, some of them connected to globalization. As Ottaviano puts it, it would be even only worsen if Trump implements those funny protectionist measures across the board, not selective. I think one point which is important is the distinction between smart and not smart protectionism. There can be a smart protectionism. For example, classically, a new industrial country has to protect its market to create industry, or it can make sense under certain limited circumstances to protect new products. For example, when Biden says we should, I will put taxes on electric vehicles, it does make sense. Because otherwise there would be no American supply. So no competition. And it does make sense also because as there are not too many American consumers buying Chinese EV, the cost is not high for them. So it is manageable. But across the board, protectionism will only end up with what Ottaviano said. That is a huge increase in the cost of living. So the Democrats, they have studied that thoroughly. But I think we have to admit that there is a strong divide in American society as to foreign policy. And I think it's not only a political divide, but a division in society. And that will lead to your question. The Democrats have studied the reason why there were those kind of America First theories and propaganda, and why it has some fuel. And they have seen that part of the American society feels abandoned because some old industrial regions have been deserted by industry, because the average American feels has to face education or health cost. And the Trumpism is an attempt, is populism. So it's to sell, as Ottaviano puts it very clearly, to sell emotion to people, to sell emotional satisfactions instead of addressing the real problem. So the Democrats have tried to see what can we do seriously to face the real issues. Mm-hmm. But of course, this is harder to sell because it needs time, it needs patience. Biden has undertaken many things, long-term policies, which are the only efficient ones, but of course it doesn't pay off immediately. When you invest for 10 or 20 years, you need many years to make it pay off. So the results of Biden's action are not yet completely visible. The other point is that everywhere in Europe and America, people are unsatisfied. Electorate is unsatisfied. So if you want to lead European or American countries, you have to accept to be unpopular and to govern in unpopularity. So this is
one important thing. Yeah, no, I agree, but just to make the following point. Not by chance, Kamala Harris called Trump's trade proposals as tax on Americans. She named it. And there is an important difference as well. You said about the middle class. Trump proposed the extension, the perpetuity of the tax exemption for income and real estate. Whereas Kamala proposed to differentiate and keep the exemption for those Americans who live with less than $400,000 a year and tax above. So income distribution-wise, the proposals coming from Kamala, like the ones that were being alluded to by Biden, are address or tackle, deal with the income concentration, the differentiation of impacts on the families of the U.S.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe to move to the New South precisely. And Ottaviano, you notably mentioned this global connectors country. By the way, in a Bloomberg article, Morocco was mentioned.
Yes,
as one of these, as one potential global connector at least. I was wondering what effects you see the future policies, the probable future policies having on potential industrialization in the South. To maybe make my question more precise. So far, the different trade restrictions, export controls, etc., that have been implemented vis-à-vis China have materialized in a flurry of investment in Mexico, in Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, etc.
On behalf of China, you mean?
Yes, Chinese investment absolutely to access the U.S. market, absolutely.
Yes.
So this is a clear indication that actually these policies are in part failing to reach their goal.
They can be bypassed.
Exactly, they can be bypassed because they do not contribute to entrench, so to speak, the Chinese from different value chains and from different strategic value chains and critical value chains, and it actually contributes to helping them further embed themselves through more complex networks of production and so on and so forth. So how do you see the Biden and Trump administrations possibly addressing this issue, and notably in their relation to the global South? Because there is still an opportunity for some countries here, of the New South, sorry, exactly.
Yes, let us talk about Africa. Mm-hmm. For the US, I think the the world is divided in two types of continents. On the one hand, you have Europe, Asia, and Oceania. On the other hand, you have Africa and Latin America. With Europe and Asia, broadly speaking, they have had a very thoughtful and strategic policy in the 20th century. They have thought of China very clearly in the 40s. They built the alliance with Europe, with NATO, strong relations with UK, with Germany, strong relations with alliance with Japan, Korea. They have been very strategic. For Latin America and Africa, it's completely different. They don't have such a strategic vision. There was, of course, the Monroe Doctrine, which was say Europe, we are not going to interfere in Europe and do not interfere in America, which led to the Theodore Roosevelt more interventionist policy in Latin America. So they made many mistakes, I think, in Latin America with the military dictatorship, with the coup in Chile, etc. They didn't do exactly the same mistakes in Africa. So Africa may be the continent where the Americans have the greatest opportunities because they have not too much past. They didn't make too many mistakes because they didn't do nothing. They were in favor. They had a rather naive vision of Africa. They were in favor of, in the 50s and 60s, of independences, saying we too are a former colony, which is partly true, because they were the colonialists, but they say we were a colony. And there was also the idea of Mother Africa for the black Americans. And also during the Cold War, they pushed France, or they let France intervene in Africa and fight the Russian influence on behalf of the West, indeed. Even if France didn't see it that way, but it was the deal. So they are, to some extent, new. They can be naive. For example, the idea of Mother Africa for black Americans is just a dream, because black Americans, when they go to Congo, they don't feel they want to be, they want to see their future in that, you know. So it's a bit abstract. Mm-hmm. But they could do a lot. They could do a lot because they have not so much past. They can bring new finance. They can bring opportunities on the market. And I think, of course, all that would be ruled out if Trump wins, because all that is too complicated for him. But maybe the Dems could try and do something on the long haul. I don't see. I don't know how you see that.
Yeah, in matters of colonialism, for Europeans to talk about it, it's kind of complicated.
These two?
Europeans talking about colonialism in Africa, it's a bit complicated.
Yes, more complicated than for the US. Yes, of course. Yes.
But I want to add something that I see. There is another dimension of the Democrats versus Republicans, with implications for the rest of the world and including for everyone else, not only Africa and Latin America, but the whole world, which is on the energy front.
Right.
Given the size of the U.S. economy, whatever happens on the energy front there has implications for the rest of the world, including the climate change agenda.
No, right.
And this matters a lot because while Kamala Harris is proposing to keep further the trajectory of replacing fossil fuels with the solar energy, wind, and the geothermal plants and so on, Trump has promised, drill, baby, drill. Go back and he has mentioned this together with cutting out substantial content of the Inflation Reduction Act, the investments that were associated. So the rest of the world will suffer consequence of this option between Kamala Harris versus Trump on the energy side. And also on immigration. You mentioned the overperformance of the US economy in the last 3 years. That would not have been thinkable were not for the return of migration to the US. No way it would have happened. And Trump has already pledged not only the deportation, massive deportation of illegal immigrants, but also do things like do not recognize change the law with respect to the acknowledgement of born kids in the US as Americans. Right. So on the immigration side, we're going to have as well a big difference between the two candidates. Mm-hmm. So we should not lose sight of the implications in terms of energy policies and immigration policies.
Right. Quite fair to say.
It's a sort of nativist rhetoric that Trump espouses.
Yeah, I would say more than rhetoric. I would say if he implements what he's pledged, you're going to have massive deportation of people from the U.S.
Do you think he can actually do it? He never built a wall.
Legally, there's a lot of controversy on whether it's doable immediately, but he will push for it. And in fact, the attitude of the authorities dealing with immigrants may be quite different from what it has been in the last few years.
About immigration, indeed, this has been a major contributor to the gap widening between European and US growth. The Draghi report has some expectations in terms of the demographic dynamics in the future of Europe, and notably loss of in the working force.
Yes.
And therefore, it's very much about betting on European productivity. How do you see that affecting countries in the Global South, and notably trading partners of the European Union? The fact that it seems that what he takes for a given would be that it is impossible, for whatever reasons, to massively open the gates of Europe to migrants from other countries, and notably from developing nations.
Well, indeed, there is some trade-off between trade and migration. If you don't want workers from the south, you have to, if you don't want them on your territory, you have to buy goods which they will produce in their country.
Mm-hmm. Right.
No? So I'm a bit skeptical about the idea of closing migrations. Ottaviano is right to say that it's a very strong part of the Trump's program, but I think I'm not sure it would be able to do all of that, and I'm even not sure his real aim is to do so. His aim is to make it voting support. You know, it's and this is a bad thing also, because if you say problems are just the migrant, you don't face the real problems. Yeah. If you say climate policies are awful, you don't face the climate issue. You just use a climate populism. And all that is very bad, not only in the consequences if it is implemented, but even by the sole fact that it is put forward in the middle of the table instead of real problems. And this is the trouble with populism
It is
everywhere.
true. It is true.
It's even the same in France. When you say, for example, that Marine Le Pen says that she could reduce the deficit of the state by cutting cost of migration, it's just absurd.
Yeah,
Because migrants, there are some social costs in favor of migrants, but they contribute a lot, for example, for pensions.
yes.
So it's just, and when she says we are going to reduce the contribution to EU, it's completely inoperative, because the contribution to EU are negotiated, and because the French negotiators are not stupid, they did what they could. France has a standard of living which is above the average in Europe, so it's normal to pay a bit more than you receive, and you cannot just change that with a snap decision. No? So the trouble with populism is, of course, on the one hand, where it could lead to, but also the real issues it tries to take from the table. And this is why I think more longer-term vision has more strength. We have more strength in the democracy.
It's true. Before I lose the time, there is another dimension of US elections that we have not been contemplating, which will matter a lot, which is who wins the House and the Senate.
Right.
Yes.
Trump, whom in his first presidency, maybe the last, hopefully the last, they couldn't take forward his project of building the wall because of it standstill with Congress. Congress did not approve. Nor the president of Mexico, as he made a declaration, he would not pay for it, as Trump said. The fact is that it will have implications on what each one of them, both Kamala and Trump, may want to do. Just give an example. Trump pledges to cut out the non-spent part of the IRA. Guess what? The money from the IRA is going to states, to Republican states. So the Republican states will not like the idea of closing the IRA and so on. By the same token, each of the other polemic proposals will depend a lot on the configuration of the Senate and the Congress.
Yes.
It's a really...
And it will be very difficult for the Democrats in Senate for just an arithmetical reason, which is that there are not many Republican seats that are called for election, and more Democrat seats. So the margin for winning for the Democrats are small, and the margin for losing are wider. So I think on the Senate, if they keep their one-seat majority, it would be
a blessing. Yes.
a blessing. Of course, and the House is more sensitive to the moves, since it's every second year, and to the global majority. But what Ottaviano said is very important on subsidies. Biden's programs benefit a lot to Republican states, to rural America, to Rust Belt counties. And so it anchors them. It makes them stronger politically and more difficult to dismantle. So in appearance, you could say that it is a bit naive from Biden, but in reality, first it contributed to them being adopted by the Senate. Many of Biden's programs were bipartisan and voted by a kind of 70 against 30 majority in Senate, which we should underline, because in the polarization it's something remarkable that such an achievement was made. No? But I think on the long term it will also be very complicated for Trump to dismantle that. And the problem for Trump when he was president was a separation of powers in America. And there is a discrepancy between his vision, very sudden moves, on the one hand, and the separation of powers. He had problem with justice, he had also problem with Congress, as you said.
Including his arrogant statements about what he would do with the Federal Reserve Bank.
Right. At most, he can replace Jerome Powell 2 years from now with some goose, with someone who could fall prey to his orders and so on. Whereas the full board of voting Fed members, comprised by 15, they're more stable and they take long. So his pledge, his promise to control and substitute for the Federal Reserve Bank is a lie. It is not. And this matters because, given his populist, he wants, in his own mentality, mercantilist, he wants to devalue the US dollar. And for that matter, he would have to have a Federal Reserve Bank that reduce interest rates no matter what, and therefore that's why he's been referring so much to this possibility of interfering. But again, as Dominique said, for good reasons, there is the independence of institutions that would impede him to do it.
Yes.
And by the way, Trump has pledged to establish tariffs, punishment, on countries that may work with the Chinese on the replacement of the US dollar. I wonder what's going to happen, what would happen with so many countries that have recently established convertibility agreements with China, with the PBOC, on using local currency, the renminbi. And that includes Brazil, Australia, not Australia. In fact, the PBOC has made agreement with hundreds of countries. So if Trump goes down that road, I wonder what he would do. He would fight with the whole New South. This is something that matters to the New South as well.
True. Absolutely.
Yes, Trump is a caricature of Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Theodore Roosevelt.
It's to some extent even offensive to Theodore Roosevelt to compare Trump with him.
Yes.
He would be shaking on his ground.
Theodore Roosevelt used to define American foreign policy that way. You have to carry a big stick and speak gently. So Trump is speaking badly with a stick which is deteriorating.
Yeah, very small stick, you're right.
And so it's also, that is also a delusion. It will be very delusional. As Ottavio said, the Federal Reserve Bank is a separation of power issue. It's also completely paradoxical, because if you want to fight inflation, it's clear that it's very efficient to have an independent central bank, because this independence guarantees that the bank will fight inflation without respect to immediate consequences. Why did the Germans create the Bundesbank after tradition of great inflation? It's because for that reason. It would be, I think, very difficult. And another point behind that is that to me, thanks to the work of the think tanks in America, the moderate and liberal think tanks, the Democrats are united, deeply united on a clear doctrine which is realistic and which takes into account the problem raised by Trump. Whereas on the other hand, the Reps are not united at all. They are terrorized by the MAGA basis of Trump. Some of them have been threatened physically. Some member of the House of Representatives and the Senate. But this type of false unity, you pay for that. You pay for it. Because you can keep people silent, but you cannot prevent them from talking around them. You know? And Trump antagonized many people. For example, you remember when he insulted the former candidate against Obama, the former prisoner of the...
Mitt Romney?
No.
McCain.
Thank you.
The Vietnam hero.
Yes, as Trim said. He was a war hero. He had been prisoner in Vietnam, and he was insulted by Trump because he had been caught.
Yes.
And the widow of McCain, yes, he died a few years ago. His widow was still in Arizona, and she had a lot of money, and she contributed to Trump's defeat in 2020. If you do that, if you replicate this type of behavior, at the end of the day, you lose support. You know, you can do whatever you want, but this way of playing politics weakens you. And so the strength of Trump is not that sure. It's not this sure.
Well, thank you very much to the both of you. Perhaps I will turn to the audience. If anyone has any question he would like to ask. I would have plenty myself, but I would like to give the floor to our attendees first. No question?
Please.
Yeah.
Don't leave us alone.
Otherwise, the edition will have to cut this part of the silence.
So I just want to go back to the issue of connector countries and the prospects in terms of the candidates pushing tariffs and punishing them. We've heard about the plans of Trump if he comes back to the White House, but we haven't heard much from Kamala Harris. Some say we haven't heard much about her whole program, but when it comes to this very issue, we don't know what she's planning to do, basically. And also, I want to come back on something that Mr. Bouquet said on the Africa not being attractive to African Americans. We've seen some African countries pushing initiatives and wanting to attract African Americans. I think specifically of Ghana with the year of return, and of Benin, who recently passed a law to attract descendants of slaves to come back to Benin and gain the nationality. And from what I've read, the program was a success. So in terms of their prospects, do you see this trend growing, and do you see more African Americans coming back to the continent, and how could they contribute to the economic transformation of the countries that will welcome them?
Let me start with the first question. See, keep in mind that it's Kamala first clearly called Trump's proposals as a tax on poor families. That means that she would not undergo any sort of overall horizontal tariff increase such as the ones that Trump is promising. I foresee that maybe more of what has been done with electric vehicles. But again, this is, as Dominique aptly said, focused for justifiable reasons or not, national security, whatever, defense against, but it's localized, it's not the broad. So one can say reasonably that the likely trade policy pursued by Kamala Harris is on those lines, is not so much unknown. Definitely not the kind of a 10 to 20% overall tariff increase or 60% on the Chinese. On the second part, second question, then I do not necessarily feel, let's say, well-grounded. But the issue of migration is contrariwise. Is people wanting to go to these rich countries, US or in Europe. It's not a movement going back to the roots or something. Even forgive me for any stupidity that might say, for ignorance, but even the return of black Americans to Liberia long time ago was kind of a pushback. Was not because suddenly the African Americans felt, oh, I want to go back to my original roots, and so I go to Liberia. So I doubt very much that even if Benin or other countries want, that they would be able to pull back migrants.
I can tell you an anecdote. In the 50s, when the Americans started their good intentioned policies in Africa, there was the independence of Ghana. When Nixon was the vice president of Eisenhower, I think it was in 56, was the independence of Ghana or something like that. Right?
Yeah.
And Nixon, so he went to Accra and he saw 3 journalists. And he told them, oh, how is it to be free? And they said, oh, we don't know, we come from Alabama. Well, there was a very segregationist policy. So I think it's typically an example. It's not a bad idea to use the black American community and to empower them in Africa to be a symbol of race not being important and not being a divide between Africa and America. This is not a bad idea of some leaders or some teachers. This could be very good. One of the most transformational decisions made about South Africa when there was the apartheid came from Ronald Reagan, who was a rep, who was a right-wing rep. But compared to Trump, he would be a leftist, of course.
Yeah.
And already Bush would be a leftist compared to Trump. So, and Reagan is a leftist compared to Bush, and of course a leftist compared to Trump. And Ronald Reagan sent a black American ambassador in the racist South Africa. It was extremely embarrassing for the South African government. This was very clever. So you can have some initiatives, the type, but it doesn't make an overall policy.
That's right.
Okay. I had a question myself on fiscal discipline.
Okay.
How strong is? I mean, how strong is that in the discourses of both parties? Because obviously the Democrats have used a lot of debt to fund their different programs. You had a lot of social programs as well that have been implemented. But on the other end, Donald Trump promises to considerably cut taxes.
Right.
So, I mean, we seem to be really diverging from the Washington consensus in that regard as well.
Oh, yes.
On both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, it's true. But with a larger magnitude on Trump's side, Trump's policies clearly will explode the deficit because neither the revenue with tariffs would make up for the foregone tax revenue loss, as well as his intentions do not match. See, it doesn't mean that the U.S. doesn't face a challenge in terms of fiscal landscape. Yes, it does. Not only the whole Europe as well. So the fiscal issue has come to stay for long with these countries. But at the end of the day, from the estimates that one can make, Trump's policies will make it even worse. And there is this paradox in the US. If you look at since Reagan, the Republican administrations have exhibited more deficit than the Democrat ones.
Because there is this sort of ideological focus on just
That's
cutting
right.
taxes.
Yes.
You can say that the reps focus on taxes and the Dems on spending. So the Democrats endeavor to develop spending. They say we would like to increase taxes, but they cannot do so because the reps take care of taxes.
Although Clinton had a very responsible fiscal management.
Yeah, very responsible.
And the other thing would be about, you said that contrarily to the Democrats, the Republicans have not really organized in terms of program implementation, etc. The Republicans, the Democrats, they organize around a platform structured by think tanks. You often refer to the report on making foreign policy work for the middle class by the Carnegie Corporation, etc. But the Republicans, it feels that through the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025,
they deny. Now Trump is denying that he has backing. He himself said he had nothing to do with it.
They have a program, but Trump says it's not mine.
True. Okay.
Yeah, the Heritage Foundation.
Whereas with the Democrats, they have a kind of doctrine that was built over the last 6-7 years, and they make precise proposals that are consistent with the doctrine, but are not just replicating what the think tank said, of course, but that's their program. Whereas in Trump, there's no clear vision.
Okay, so basically the Republicans have this wild card that is the persona of Donald Trump, while the Democrats have a program. Would it be a way to sum it up?
Yeah.
Okay, well, if there are no further questions, thank you to the both of you. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you very much to
insights.
you, Pram. It was very interesting to discuss.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all our attendees for being with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
Merci beaucoup.